Today, new security scanners were rolled out at airports across the country. They're supposed to be less intrusive, but they're just as unconstitutional. And what's worse is that the TSA has decided to stop letting airports opt out of government-run security. My next guest is as furious as I am. Here now, Republican Florida Congressman and Chair of the House Transportation Committee, John Mica. Congressman Mica helped create the TSA. He wrote the statute that brought them into existence, but now sees that that organization has gone too far. Congressman, welcome back to Freedom Watch. So you wrote the statute. You know what's in it. You wrote it. You've read it. I've read it. And it says that an airport in the United States can opt out of having the TSA there so long as the private security that's in there meets the TSA standards. How can a bureaucrat at the TSA trump a statute written by the Congress?
Well, I think Congress is going to act. The Senate is already taking action to change what the administrator has arbitrarily done. And you know, what would 3,700 bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., just in the TSA administration do if we had private contracting operations out there?
Well, there's 60,000 employees of the TSA. Those are 60,000 human beings who did not work for the federal government 6 or 7 years ago. Why are they interested in controlling, regulating, monitoring, probing, and prodding more people at more airports instead of fewer people at fewer airports?
Well, that's a good question, and it needs to be addressed. This has mushroomed from 16,500 to nearly 65,000 TSA employees, bigger than many of our cabinet agencies, and unfortunately not performing very well, whether it's with the new technology, with the pat-downs, or with some of the other procedures that they've put in place. The SPOT program, which was supposed to detect behavior, we had 17 instances where known terrorists went through 24 checkpoints and were never detected by TSA. So the system is not working.
Are we forever saddled with the choice between a pornographic photograph of our bodies and a stranger touching our private parts? Or is this program serious that the TSA is rolling out where they will take pictures that are less graphic, less invasive, and less offensive?
Well, somehow in the last 4 years, they managed to buy nearly $1 billion worth of this equipment, and we're going to investigate what took place there. I think that's important that we need to know. The worst thing is that the equipment doesn't allow them to function, from the reports we've got, any better in detecting what poses a risk. So we spent all this money, and we're not any safer.
Did they buy that equipment from Mike Chertoff, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security and ran the TSA in the Bush administration? Is that a myth or is that true?
Well, again, that's a matter that will be under investigation. I just finished meeting with one of the representatives on government reform and oversight, one of the subcommittee chairs, and he will be conducting a thorough review of that entire acquisition.
All right. Where do you see this going? Is the TSA going to be able to say to private people, you can't come here, or is the law of the land going to be enforced?
Well, the last 4 years, TSA has been sort of rudderless leadership, gone astray, no TSA administrator. We've got to do a better job of oversight, getting an important agency under control.
Got it. Congressman Mica, thanks for joining us. Smarter and better government? Meet the brilliant guy who says there's no such thing. Next. New York Times bestselling author Thomas Wood's new book, Rollback, asserts that the only reason government has the confidence of the people is because we've been taught that our every success is due to good government policies, when in fact, any success we have is often in spite of the government. With us now to explain is the author himself, Tom Woods. Tell me the thesis of the argument. We've been duped into believing the government has helped us. In fact, the government has sapped our liberty and sapped our prosperity.
Exactly. Basically, we have been tricked into accepting a 6th grade version of government, in which government is populated by wise public servants who are just pursuing the public good, and Without them, we'd be just a bunch of helpless boobs. We would have no arts without the government arts funding. We'd have no science without the government science funding. We'd all be ignoramuses without the Department of Education.
How do you answer
and we accept
those
this? Well, we'll go in reverse. The Department of Education was founded under Jimmy Carter. I think we had some education before that. I don't think people at the local level are too stupid to run their own schools or should be paying $80 billion a year for the privilege of being bossed around by their betters. In terms of science funding, in the 19th century, Britain had almost no public science funding, basically zero, and it was way ahead of France and Germany, which had a whole lot of science funding. So I've got a lot of answers to that. And then the arts, for heaven's sake. The National Endowment for the Arts is like $200 million, but billions is donated in private funds.
Can the federal government be counted on? I can't even ask this question seriously, to respect its own power, to stay within the confines of the Constitution, or will it always find some new area of human behavior that it claims it can regulate?
Well, I think if history is going to teach us anything, it's that no matter how you try to restrain an institution that has a monopoly on violence, a monopoly on taxation, if you try and just hand it a piece of paper and say, go limit yourself, good luck. It has no incentive whatsoever to do that. But what it will also do, as it expands, it will always expand its power beneath a veneer of public interest rhetoric. It's all just for you and me, Judge. They're not feathering their own nests. It's for you and me.
A colleague of ours, Jerry Salenti, is coming on right after you, and
Good
he's
man.
about to say that the world is going to collapse very soon, that times are very bad, that the government is truly hiding how bad things are.
Yeah.
How bad are things if the federal government keeps borrowing and spending and regulating and controlling as it has been doing since World War II, since FDR?
A lot of people think, the debt's high, but it's been high for a while and nothing seems to have happened, so why should we worry about it? But by 2020, best case scenario, if interest rates are low, we have a robust recovery, best case scenario is every year $1 trillion in interest payments alone on the national debt. And then secondly, in the U.S. and around the developed world, a demographic catastrophe as the aging of the population makes it impossible for all the welfare state promises to be kept.
We have about a minute to go. The title is very intriguing, Rollback. What can we roll back?
Everything. Let's go back. I'll be as reasonable as Murray Rothbard. We'll go back to the budget of George Washington. If it was good enough for George, it's good enough for me.
Is any of that realistic today? Look at who controls the government.
That's true.
Even the Republicans.
That's true.
Ron Paul and a couple of his colleagues are the exceptions. Even they're big government.
Maybe it has to come only through a general collapse, and then we're forced to do it. But let's hope we do it through reason right now when we have relative calm, than at a moment of complete collapse when investors lose confidence in the U.S. That's not a time that you want to be making radical changes to people's lives.
The book is Rollback. It's the best explanation on the market today of how we got to the gloom and doom and the mess that we're in now. And it's written by a guy who's very easy to read. Tom Woods, thanks very much.
Thank you,
for joining
Judge.
us. And now a few items from our Freedom File. Cops in Baltimore, Maryland oppose the city's use of electronic traffic cameras at intersections, not because the police think the cameras are ineffective or unconstitutional, which they are, but because they don't like paying tickets themselves. In Baltimore, if cops run a red light while in police vehicles and get caught by one of these cameras, they have to pay the ticket unless they can prove they were responding to an emergency. Oh, this has the police union up in arms. How dare the city of Baltimore treat speeding police officers like regular drivers? Does the city not realize that the police are above the law? Well, thankfully, in this case and in Baltimore, they're not. Only in Chicago could public school administrators be this brazen. The school district there faces a mere $700 million budget shortfall, and yet administrators at one elementary school took a $15,000 trip to Las Vegas on the taxpayers. Is this some sort of a joke? The government forcibly takes money from you in the form of taxes to pay for schools and then spends your stolen money on trips to Vegas. The only thing more upsetting than such an abuse of public funds is the fact that the public schools do such an awful job as educating your kids in the first place. Luckily, what happens in Vegas doesn't always stay in Vegas, and now Chicago knows about it. While so many claim that there are some secrets the government needs to keep, the recent WikiLeaks revelation that Saudi Arabia overstated its oil reserves by 40% shows definitively that truth trumps secrecy. You see, such a secret only benefits the narrow interests of politicians and diplomats. The Saudis know that if oil prices get too high, people will create better alternatives to oil. And American politicians know that if gas prices rise in the short term because of this secrecy, the politicians will get the boot. The point is, you need to know how much you can about oil and how much is out there, and the market needs to know this too. With the correct information, consumers and the market will determine the most efficient use of oil. But as long as oil information is kept a secret, political insiders benefit at your expense. Even my friend and WikiLeaks opponent, Stuart Varney, is happy about this revelation. Last night, we heard from an expert who says happy days are here again with the economy. Next, a person who's taking the punch bowl away from that rosy prediction. After this.